Well, g'day. Totally unprepared Iron Horse here once again to try and make a demonstration to show how we can gel in the two concepts, the sundial and the Coriolis effect, both on the stationary planar Earth model. Now that's a map of the stationary planar Earth. It doesn't mean it's the map. But what it is good and useful, adequate demonstration of how our flat Earth works. So we've got some clown round Earth world. I mean, round Earth world. That's his YouTube name. He's now breached copyright to share some of my content on his channel. And, like all you have to do is say, hey, do you mind if I use some of your content on your channel? I was go for it, whatever. Oh yeah, first one of the day is always good. Oh, so he didn't. He contacted me through a comment, like he's tagged me on a comment on something I'm not even involved in. I'm not even interested in watching. I don't care about some of these blurfs and their YouTube channels and all the crap they make these days. Doesn't interest me. Back in the early days of knowing the Earth is flat and stationary, I spent a fair bit of time going to the globe Earth people's channels, because where else are you going to learn? Who else can you bounce your ideas off if not with those who fully believe the opposite of what you think you've not discovered yourself independently, but what you've discovered in your journey in life about the world we live upon. It's the biggest subject ever, the Earth being flat or being a round spinning ball hurtling through space. So, of course, I'd go to a lot of those channels, bounce off my ideas, until now I've reached the point I've pretty much got a pretty good beat on it. I don't need to associate with drop kicks anymore. It's like when a tree drops its branches, it leaves the dead wood behind. It turns into mulch, which is basically just Mother Nature's organic shit. And it becomes nutrients for which the tree keeps on growing. And so the tree doesn't dwell on the dead wood, it leaves it behind. Same as the dead leaves. It's all left behind. That's why they're leaves. See what I did there? Must be why they fall in the autumn. So what I'm going to discuss today is Coriolis effect and the sundial. And you have to have a pretty good idea of the flat Earth model in order for it to make sense. So, without having to adjust the camera all over the joint here, we can just basically see North Pole, Antarctica, the equator, Tropic of Capricorn, Tropic of Cancer. That's the basic flat Earth model. Now, I think I've explained before, I'll briefly do it again now, because let's say we had a sheet of frosted glass over the map. And obviously we're down on the ground looking up through the frosted glass at the rest of the universe. I say frosted glass because I don't think it's clear glass. If it was perfectly clear glass, we'd get blinded by the sun. It's kind of frosted. In fact, the term for firmament, or rakia in Hebrew, the three main definitions of it are stretched out like a tarpaulin, beaten flat like metal, like bronze, that was one of the strongest metals they had back then, or as molten glass. Now, all three of those descriptions would be a very good description for somebody who had never seen a frozen lake before to describe ice. So the term frosted glass is very apt and specifically used, and not the real frosted stuff that you sometimes see on some bathroom windows, but just finely frosted, so it's see-through, opaque, but semi-opaque, sorry. So we're looking up at the sun. Right, yeah, so if it's going around the equator every day, and let's say it's 3,000 miles high on average, or maybe it's, in winter time, maybe it's 5,000 miles high. So because as it gets further away, yes, it's here we go. Here's one of them. Where's the camera? Camera is there. Gotcha. See how the front end of the tube appears bigger than the back end of the tube, but watch this. No tricks of the camera here. I'm not pausing or editing or anything. Look at that. Now the back end, which was the front end, looks smaller than the back end, which is now the front end. Perspective. So if the sun is going around the equator, then when it's at the back end, from there, that's the front end. Yeah, you have to keep perspective in mind when looking up. The further away it is, the smaller the circle it would seem to make in our frosted glass, which is just 70 miles high above the stationary plane of Earth, maybe even less. Maybe it's 60, 62. That's a figure I hear a lot. I'll give 70 for benefit of the doubt, and if that's not enough, make it 250. It doesn't make much difference. It's still just 2 millimeters above this beach ball. That stuff is flat. Couldn't help myself, had to do that one. So it's just 2 meters above this beach ball, and it's flat. That's what I think the firmament is, an ice sheet. And so the sun, as it gets further away, higher, seems to make the smaller circle around tropical Cancer. Gets lower. We have two equinoxes around the equator, and we have the summer solstice for the southern hemisphere, December 22nd, which is the winter solstice for the people in the middle. Now, I've been told I get in the way of my whiteboard and my stuff, and people can't hear me so well when I speak. So I'll try and raise my voice when I turn around and look this way, and I'll try to not stand in front of the whiteboard as I do some pictures, drawings. So I guess I should have wiped that off first. I wonder if it's just going. I shouldn't leave it up there for so long, eh? Someone might draw a picture of a cat. When you rub the cat off, it might be a D. Fortunately, I don't work in a school, and I should have thought about rubbing that off earlier. In fact, what I'll do is I'll quickly pause it, and I'll be right back. Right, yeah, told you I'll be right back. And well, hang on a second. Right, yeah, we're good to go. Had to lubricate the throat. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? So what I'm going to present to you today is the sundial. We all know what a sundial looks like. It's basically a disc like this, and it's got markers set out across it for the daytime. The nighttime you don't worry about. And then across the top you've got this thing basically shaped like that, and so you wouldn't see through it. And that thing is called the gnomon. But we pronounce it gnomon. That thing is the gnomon. It's a solid arm. It's what casts a shadow. So when the sun rises in the east and tracks around the sky through the day and sets over here in the west, it will cast a shadow. So that would be 6 a.m, 8, 10, 12, blah, 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 until 6 p.m. in the evening, the shadow casts over there. And that's your basic sundial. So just bear that in mind when we consider the hugeness of the Earth. Okay, it takes all day for the sun to travel around the Earth 40,000 kilometres. That's a lot of kilometres. If you measured it out in degrees, if that's your 12 o'clock there, then to go all the way around to get back to 12 o'clock again, that is 360 degrees. Now this one, the Globers cannot argue with about that. They say it's the Earth spinning on its axis. In fact, I've got a globe Earth now. It's got an axis, it's tilted as such. And where's that dirty there's a dirty spot on here somewhere. There it is. That there. That could be Australia. So it's spinning, and the only way it can get back to where it started again is to go 360 degrees, one rotation of a circle. This is very important to bear in mind because I've got a 24-hour clock on order too. It's going to be here next week or in the next couple of weeks. And it's a 24-hour clock. They're hard to find, a lot harder than you'd think. You'd think they'd be pretty common, but an analog clock. So the hour hands matching the sun. The sun is the hour hand of flat Earth, of the flat Earth clock. And if you set your clock time locally to midday, according to the sundial, which I just rubbed out, and every day of the year, the sundial and the clocked time will be the same, 12 p.m. midday. Trust me, I'm getting the clock. I'll find one at a garden centre. I'll get a sundial as well if I have to prove it. And I'll take videos and more pictures every day and present them to prove my point. Now, the reason we have a difference of time, the shorter days and longer days, is because as the sun gets higher up, making the smaller looking circle, the amount of sunlight coming through the frosted glass is what determines the length of sunlight hours that you will get locally. So if you're outside of the equator, like down here in Brazil and South America, you will get shorter days when the sun is north of the equator, and when the sun is south of the equator or outside, you'll get longer days. It's the way it works, seen up through a fixed height. So the sun always appears to be the same height. So with that in mind, let's just say we've got a local area like this. America's probably quite good, so we'll put North America up there and South America down here, and the equator is actually that line through South America. That's your equator line there. Okay, and as you can see, I left out Alaska. Sorry, Alaska. And Florida. Sorry, Florida. Fucking hell, I'm an artist. Sorry, Florida. You're only little. And there's Cuba. All right, so we've got our basic model. So as the sun tracks from the east, it's not a very good marker pen. So here's our sun here. So here's our sun here. Only to scale, it would be that big. But anyway, it's tracking across this way. Okay, let's bear that in mind. And it takes 24 hours to do 360 degrees. Now I know, it makes you wonder then, well, how does this much of the Earth, this much, it's like that much of the Earth, see the sun for 50% of the day, wouldn't it have to be that much? Well, yeah, the sun is actually over here in the morning and over there in the evening. Perspective and height are not the easiest thing in the world to understand, and I don't want to get bogged down in that. We'll just go with the simplistic thing and say it takes from Well, in reality, if we're going to say, the person on the ground, they're seeing the sunrise here and they're seeing the sunset there. It wouldn't even be that big. That's their 12 hours of the day. So, again, getting perspective down is kind of tricky. But, okay, let's say we've got a sundial down here and we've got a sundial up here, okay? For the purposes of the argument. This one has his gnomon pointing that way, and this one has his gnomon pointing that way. You're facing south in the southern hemisphere, and you face the north in the northern hemisphere. So what happens as the sun comes over here? Well, the first shadow it's going to cast is going to be over here. And for this one, it's over here. See, because that's where the sun is coming from. By the time it gets to 8 in the morning, it's there and there. By 10, it's there and there. And then by 12 midday, it's there and there. Because here's the sun casting a shadow or light in all directions. So north of the equator, your shadow of your gnomon is going to be lined up, pointing north, 12 midday. Southern hemisphere, pointing south, 12 midday. And the shadows have both gone that direction and that direction, because that's the way the sun comes. So as you can see, it's exactly like the opposite, the exact different thing between a boat passing through water. Found some more pens, cool. I wonder if these all wet. When we've got a boat passing through water, let's look at it from the top down. So it's going that direction, and the wake of the boat comes out this way. So the vortices of water spiral off in opposite directions. So in a sense, the motion of the sun is doing a similar thing, only the shadows are going in opposite directions. So the light that it creates and the heat transfer of it is doing kind of like what the boat is doing through water. It's going that way, the vortices are spiraling off the other way. But the sun above the firmament, shining light down into it, so everyone's got a direct line of sight up to the sun. So you all see it in a unique position for every different place in the world. The sun is still creating the same effect of light hitting the surface of the earth. And when the light hits physical, tangible matter, it creates heat. That's why heat and light are associated with one another. Probably haven't heard the expression of a heat lamp. We know you light a bulb, you go and touch it, it's hot, it burns. Heat is a byproduct of the light. So as the sun passes overhead, it is also creating heat. And what happens to heat? Well, hot air rises. And pressure is always seeking to equalize. You've also got the other aspect of heat, and that is entropy. And entropy is one of the most interesting things about it, because while you can create heat, technically you can't create cold. I mean, you can create air conditioning and refrigeration and all that as a byproduct of heat. But when you're creating cold, what you're really doing is losing heat. You're taking heat out. That's entropy. Entropy is heat loss. And you need energy to create heat. And that is why the law of thermal dynamics, it's called thermal dynamics, is because heat loss always means you need to put more energy in than what you will get back out because of entropy, heat loss. That's why the perpetual motion machine technically will never be made. But the globers think that the Earth is a perpetual motion machine, and the moon and the sun and all those things are perpetual motion. But I'm not going to use that as an argument against them today. Perpetual motion. So entropy and heat loss basically means that when the atmosphere gets warmed via the light hitting the earth, hitting the water, hitting solid objects, the reflected light creates the friction, which creates the heat, and it's all ionization what gives us light. That's why we have the ionosphere, because that's the it's not just an ionosphere, it's actually the ionized gases of the atmosphere which in daylight glow to give us day. And at twilight, when the atmosphere is no longer as affected by the sun, that is why those colours fluorescing, neon, one of the noble gases, requires less energy to create a glow, and that is why the day is surrounded by twilight, because it's this indirect solar energy is now just creating enough energy to fluoresce neon or twilight, whereas in daytime it's dominated by argon, which is almost 1% of our atmospheric gases. And argon, when fluoresced, glows blue. That's why the sky is blue. Yep. A lot of people will give you all sorts of other explanations for that. 22 minutes already, beer o'clock. And they'll use different terms like Rayleigh scattering and diffusion. And while those terms might be sort of correct, giving something a name is not describing what it does or why it does it. It's just giving it a name. That's Rayleigh scattering, man. Don't you know nothing? It's like that time Mark Reed said, "It's called tidal locking, Ross." Talking about the moon because it keeps the same face facing us all the time. And I was like, yeah, I know it's called tidal locking, Mark. But knowing what it's called doesn't describe why it is and what it does and why it's doing it. So the moon will say for another day. I like the moon. It's a globe killer. So you have to understand the nature of light to understand why light creates heat. So it fluoresces the specific noble gases, and the intensity of those noble gases creating light, reflecting off objects, creates heat. You can concentrate that light. Like you've probably seen a camp stove thing where we made them back in primary school actually. You make a cone out of cardboard and line it with aluminium foil. Used to be tin foil. Now it's made out of aluminium, not aluminum. Aluminium foil, and that will concentrate the light to make even more heat to fry an egg. You know what I mean? You can concentrate light to make more heat. A magnifying glass concentrates light to make even more heat. So the heat of the day comes from the light, and fair enough, light comes from the sun, but heat does not come from the sun. Heat comes from the light, which comes from the sun. Worth bearing that in mind. They're related. And so you step out into the sunlight, you feel instant warmth. You step into shade, you feel instantly cooler. They are definitely related, but it doesn't mean that the sun itself is hot. It's not a light bulb. It's a hotspot apparition in the frosted glass firmament. So the heat created from the sunlight and the daylight, and it's worth making a distinction of that. Look at my shadow there. See how indistinct it is? that's a daylight shadow. But if you went out into sunlight, you will see it cast a very distinct shadow. Like even that one on me, it's a blurry sort of shadow because I've got a window open and there's light reflecting off a white car out there, which is acting as a natural light. In fact, normally I turn this light on. Don't know why I didn't. See what happens when I do. Will it make a difference? Hang on, pause it. There, I just turned that light on. And now, in the strength of that sunlight coming through the window, hasn't made much difference. But you know what I mean. You go outside, you step into the shade, there's a distinct difference in heat. The temperature drops instantly because there's less light hitting you. So it's not the easiest one to understand as far as the difference between the sun being hot itself, but understand it's the light. So as the sun passes across throughout the day, it creates heat, a byproduct of the light, and hot air rises. But it only rises so far. And that height is what since I've never heard anybody else call it anything else, I call it the cloud layer. Simple enough, eh? It gets cooler up higher. If you climb a mountain, you feel it getting cooler. You're getting closer to the sun, but the temperature is dropping. All the heat comes from sea level or ground level, and it gets cooler higher up. So a mountain sticking up out of the heat blanket surfacing of the earth gets into the cooler and cooler parts, to the point where even in certain places, some mountains will stay ice capped all year round, even through the summer. Heat is a very, very interesting topic, and that is part of the Coriolis effect, or Coriolis force. Now, people will try to say that it's the Earth spinning. Now, let's just pick up our Earth again and ask yourself, if the Earth is spinning towards the east, that's this way, how is it that if the whole Earth is spinning, and it's, don't forget it's always tilted, how is it that somehow this arbitrary line here determines that the air currents of a hurricane are going to go this way, one side of it, and the other way, the other side of it, when the whole thing is spinning in the same direction? It doesn't really make sense. Maybe if it wasn't tilted, you might think you've got half a chance there of explaining it, because it's the motion of the Earth itself creating the winds around the equator. But we don't get told that. What do the globers say? The atmosphere moves with the Earth. So the Earth moving through the atmosphere cannot be creating a Coriolis effect to create weather systems to be going opposite directions either side of the equator, because my atmosphere moves with my Earth. Globeheads. Control yourself. My atmosphere. So my atmosphere, so the sun moving above the atmosphere and the heat rising as the sun passes through creates a very, very subtle effect, which is where the idea of the butterfly effect actually comes from. It's a flutterby. It's not a huge spin of 1 1/3 times the speed of sound as the spinning space ball is doing, just to rotate on its axis around the equator over 1,400 kilometers an hour. I mean, you drive 100 kilometers down the highway, You know you're driving 100 kilometres. You wind your window down, stick your hand out. Yeah, 100 kilometres. 200 kilometres, man, you are speeding. You must be on a motorbike running from the cops, because that is getting fast, super duper fast. But that's still only a seventh or a 14th of the speed of the spinning space ball, moving the atmosphere with it in the effort to make the air seem still. And the higher you get up off the ball, the faster that air must be going to create the illusion of being perfectly still. And when you got winds, well, forget about it. It all just turns to mush, man. Like, that means an easterly wind is blowing 1,450 kilometers an hour, whoosh. But the westerly wind, it's actually going backwards 50 kilometers an hour to create the appearance of moving 1,350 kilometers an hour against the 1,400 kilometer an hour spin, and getting higher and lower at different heights to create the illusion of moving the same speed. The atmosphere destroys the globe. Forget about it being pressurized in a vacuum. Just, even that is absurd. More absurd than you can imagine, but the globes will argue that my gravity pulls my atmosphere to my earth and makes it rotate with it. Get it? Yeah, right. Your magical invisible pulling force pulls lighter and lighter molecules of air as they get further and further from the center of gravity and makes them all move with it. Okay, let's grant you that. Where do storms fit in? A hurricane moving 250 kilometers an hour in the vortex of the center, all those winds whipping around and around and around. They're also moving 1,400 kilometers an hour with the earth, and that motion doesn't change the deadly, destructive 250 kilometer an hour winds in the center, knocking down forests and villages and whipping up boats into the air. And but Coriolis. The globe has got nothing. Absolutely got nothing. The Coriolis effect can work from the fact that warm air will rise and create vortices in the wake of the sun, like water vortices are created in the wake of a boat. That works. And sometimes one of these, due to this butterfly effect, will create what we call a low pressure system. Well, what is low pressure? Low pressure means less air pressing down because it's low. A high pressure system is actually cold air. We think high pressure must mean it's hotter. No, that's cold air, so it's more dense, creating high pressure. Low pressure means less dense because the warm air is sucking up. And what happens when warm air gets sucked up? It takes evaporated water with it. Water boils at 100 degrees if we're applying heat to it at sea level. But if you just left the pot sitting on the stove with no heat at room temperature, in a while, a few days, a week, eventually all of that water will evaporate. It depends on your relative humidity to where you live. So water is constantly changing from a liquid to a gas all the time. And that is how we have weather systems, is the water evaporates, warm, cools, condenses at the cloud layer, because that's where it cools. And when it condenses sufficiently, it will form into drops, and due to density and buoyancy, those drops will fall back to the ground where they'll go flat all over again and create flat and level water all over the stationary planar Earth realm. So, pardon me for a sec. I'll just adjust the camera slightly because we do need to have a look at the model as I'm explaining this. So, we've got the microscopic view of it just here. That's the macroscopic view, the entire world. So what happens is when vortices of hot air spiral away, the low pressure sucks up moisture from the ocean. And because the most heat is obviously the path of the sun, which is the equator, So that's where the oceans are warmest and contain the steady amount of heat all year round. You're generally looking at about 24 up to 28 degrees all year round around the equator. And the oceans are the biggest heat sink on Earth. So as the warmer the water is, the faster it evaporates, and the lower the pressure it is, the faster it evaporates. You put a glass of water into a vacuum chamber, put the bell over it, extract the air, the water will boil at room temperature. Now you can still stick your finger in it and not get burnt. It's not boiling as in boiling hot. It's boiling as in transferring into vapor. And this is how the dynamic weather system works on the flat Earth. The sun passes around the equator every single day, and in its wake creates vortices of air, and as the hot air rises, that creates a low pressure system. And sometimes, as a result of the butterfly effect, a low pressure system will get exactly the right conditions that it will turn into a tropical cyclone or hurricane on the inner side of the equator. Tropical cyclones are on the south. And be buggered if I even know which one goes clockwise and which goes anti-clockwise. I really should have researched that before doing this, because it is one of the vital components of it, but at the end of the day, it's irrelevant because we know they go opposite directions, just like vortices in the wake of a boat. So whichever way they go, come at me, because hey, I didn't check that out first. I'm pretty sure they go clockwise in the southern hemisphere. You'd really think I would know that one off the top of my head. I'm a bad alpha, very naughty, bad classroom, Mr. Thatcher. You fucked up. That's what my teacher used to do. Crack. But it's with a wooden ruler. Anywho, back to school, show my teacher I'm no fool. I think it makes sense. The cyclone will be spinning as a low pressure system and sucking up more and more moisture because of the low pressure. And the more moisture intensifies the storm. If you know about fluid dynamics, this is one of my I think, not just mine, it's one of the biggest subjects of free energy that we will ever discover. It's vortex energy. Victor Schauberger has some brilliant stuff. Geez, I wish he was alive today. He would just be able to educate us young whippersnappers on so much stuff. But vortex energy is nature's energy. Basically what's happening, in fact I learnt this from dissecting from pulling apart a Dyson's bladeless air multiplier. Now the bladeless fan that Dysons have, that one just over there, I should go and grab it, but yeah, all right. And just like that, augmented reality brings in a Dyson's bladeless fan. Oh God, I'm good at editing videos with that old pause button. So this is a Dyson bladeless fan. As you can see, it's got no blades. But if you look closely, the blade is actually here at the back. This thin little groove here goes all the way around. And the shape of the bladeless fan, that shape is just enough of a curve like the wing of an airplane. And as that air gets shot out under high pressure from a little turbo fan blade inside there, it shoots the air out around this blade evenly, and the air getting pushed through it grabs the surrounding air, like grabs it and drags it with it. And not only that, because this is hollow, it grabs the air from behind as well. That is basically fluid dynamics, because air is a fluid. And so it's called an air multiplier because the amount of air it pushes through this little sliver through the wing-shaped, a circular wing, grabbing the surrounding air and the air from behind it, multiplies it 15 to 17 times the amount of air pushed out by a little turbofan inside there. That's why it's quite efficient. And not only that, because it hasn't got blades chopping the air, it gives an air current which is quite smooth. So that is literally vortex energy in a nutshell. Thank you, Mr. Dyson. We no longer need that for the presentation, but you understand fluid dynamics then. Say we put it in a big vortice, just like when you watch water going down the plug hole. Exactly the same thing. The water grabs the surrounding water molecules and creates a vortice. That's that spiral that you see going down the plug hole. That's a vortice, or vortice, however you want to pronounce it. So vortex energy is nature's free energy. It is fluid dynamics. And so the hurricane, once it starts spinning, it grabs more and more surrounding air and moisture and sucks up more and more moisture from the oceans, which have been warmed by the sun. And the low pressure keeps sucking up more and more and more, like a reverse sinkhole, creating a massive storm head. Now, that's why they rotate one side of the sun's path, and they rotate the other way on the other side of the sun's path. And should one, sometimes you do get it happen, where you got one here going, this way, it can sometimes cross across. And so what happens is the very next day, as the sun comes back again, all that low pressure air is sort of like, it would be the equivalent of like when you've got the spiral happening in your sink and you put your hand in and you start spinning really fast back the other way, like you're stopping it, you're physically blocking. That's basically what the sun is doing to that tropical cyclone, and it will just turn it into a rain depression. That's all that happens. That's the Coriolis effect. There is nothing else that the Coriolis effect does. People talk about sniper bullets. That's bullshit. It doesn't happen. People talk about kicking football through the goalposts and the earth moved beneath them. Even the Globers will say that doesn't happen. That's bullshit. So the Coriolis effect and the sundial are basically showing you how things go the opposite way either side of the sun's path. And that is should be the most simple thing to understand. Once you understand the flat earth model and the sun going around the powerhouse, the engine of our weather, our days and nights, it should be pretty well straightforward. I don't know why people struggle to understand it. And I think that's this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.